I found out the hard way that being self-employed with a snow plow during a Minnesota winter is like having a license to print money, except when entitled neighbors think your time should be free. My name is Yannick Harding, and I have been running a landscaping and snow removal business in Burnsville, Minnesota for the past 8 years. Every winter, when the snow starts falling, I attach the plow to my Ford F-350 and make decent money clearing driveways, parking lots, and private roads. My rates are fair, my work is reliable, and I have built up a solid client base through word of mouth and repeat customers. What I did not anticipate was moving into the Meadowbrook Hills subdivision 3 years ago and dealing with their homeowners association, specifically their president, a woman named Patricia Vandenberg, who embodied every negative stereotype about HOA board members. Patricia was in her early 50s, with that particular haircut that seemed to be mandatory for women who enjoyed complaining to managers. You know the one I am talking about. Short in the back, angled forward, usually blonde with highlights. She wore expensive athleisure wear despite never actually exercising. And she drove a white BMW X5 that she parked across 2 spaces in the community center lot. I had managed to avoid any direct confrontation with her for nearly 3 years, paying my HOA dues on time, keeping my lawn manicured, and generally staying under the radar. That changed on a Wednesday morning in January when we got hit with the first major snowstorm of 2026. The meteorologists had been hyping it up for days, and they were actually right for once. 18 inches fell overnight, with drifts reaching 3 feet in some areas. I was up at 4 in the morning, drinking black coffee and checking my route list. I had 23 clients scheduled for plowing, and at $150 per residential driveway and $300 for commercial lots, I was looking at a solid payday. The phone kept ringing with emergency requests from people who were not regular clients, desperate to get their cars out. I was polite but firm when I told them I could fit them in the next day at my emergency rate of $250 per driveway. I was finishing up my 6th job around 9:30 when my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. I let it go to voicemail, focused on getting the plow angle just right to avoid scraping the decorative stonework on the driveway I was clearing. The homeowner, an elderly man named Mr. Chen, came out with a thermos of hot chocolate and thanked me profusely. He always tipped well, and today was no exception. He handed me an extra $50, which I tried to refuse, but he insisted. That is the kind of client relationship you build when you do good work at fair prices. My phone rang again. Same number. I ignored it again, climbed back into my truck, and headed to my next job. By the time I finished the 7th driveway, I had 3 voicemails and 2 text messages from the same number. Curiosity got the better of me during my lunch break. I parked in a Caribou coffee lot, grabbed the sandwich I had packed that morning, and listened to the messages. The first voicemail was Patricia Vandenberg, and her tone was already annoyed, as if I had personally wronged her by not answering immediately. Yes, this is Patricia Vandenberg, president of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA. I need you to plow Sunset Ridge Lane immediately. The street is completely impassable, and several residents are unable to leave for work. Call me back as soon as you get this. The second message was more irritated. This is Patricia again. I do not appreciate being ignored. As a resident of this community, you have a responsibility to help your neighbors. Call me back now. The third message had crossed from irritation into outright hostility. Yannick, this is completely unacceptable. I know you are out plowing other people's driveways right now because I can see your social media posts. You need to prioritize your own neighborhood. I expect you here within the hour, or we will be having a serious discussion at the next HOA meeting about residents who do not contribute to community welfare. I sat there, sandwich halfway to my mouth, genuinely baffled. Sunset Ridge Lane was one of the streets in Meadowbrook Hills, a private road that wound through the northern section of the development. It was not my street. I lived on Maple Grove Court, which the city had already plowed because it connected to the main road. The HOA did not maintain Sunset Ridge Lane. That responsibility fell to the city or to the residents who lived on that particular street. I called her back, mostly because I wanted to clear up what seemed like a misunderstanding. She answered on the first ring. "It is about time," she said, not even greeting me properly. "When can you be here?" "Hi, Patricia, I got your messages. I think there might be some confusion. I am working today, but I have a full schedule of paying clients. If you need your driveway plowed, I can probably fit you in tomorrow morning at my standard rate." There was a pause, and I could practically hear her blood pressure rising. "I am not talking about my driveway, Yannick. My driveway is fine. I am talking about Sunset Ridge Lane. The entire street needs to be plowed." "Okay, but that is a city street. Have you called Public Works?" "It is not a city street," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "It is a private road within our subdivision. The HOA is responsible for it during emergencies, and as a resident with plowing equipment, you are obligated to help." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache forming. "Patricia, I do not think that is how it works. The HOA has never plowed that street before. The city usually handles it. And even if it was an HOA responsibility, that does not mean I am obligated to do it for free. This is my business." "Free?" She actually laughed, this brittle, humorless sound. "Who said anything about free? Though I would think as a member of this community you would want to contribute. But fine. If you insist on being compensated, the HOA can pay you a reasonable amount. $50 should cover it." I actually pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it for a moment. Sunset Ridge Lane was nearly half a mile long and would take at least 2 hours to properly clear, maybe more depending on how bad the drifts were. Between fuel, equipment wear, and my time, $50 would not even cover my costs, let alone make it worth my while. "Patricia, I charge $150 for a standard driveway. A half-mile private road in these conditions would run at least $1,200, probably $1,500 depending on what I find when I get there." The silence that followed was arctic. When she finally spoke, her words came out slow and deliberate, the way you would talk to a child you thought was being particularly stupid. "That is absolutely ridiculous. You are trying to price gouge your own neighbors during an emergency. I have half a mind to report you to the city for unethical business practices." "You are welcome to do that," I said, keeping my voice level. "But my rates are standard for the industry. If you do not believe me, call any other plowing service in the area, if you can even find one available today. Most of us are booked solid after a storm like this. I will not be extorted by someone who is supposed to be part of this community," she said. "You live here. You benefit from the amenities the HOA provides. The least you can do is help out when there is a genuine need." "And I am happy to help at my standard business rates," I replied. "I have been working since 4 this morning, and I will probably be working until midnight tonight. This is how I make my living. I cannot afford to do a $1,500 job for $50 because someone thinks I should donate my time and equipment." She hung up on me, just disconnected the call mid-conversation like a teenager in a fight with their parents. I finished my sandwich, shook my head, and got back to work. I had 17 more jobs to complete, and dwelling on Patricia's entitlement was not going to get them done any faster. Over the next few hours, my phone periodically buzzed with text messages from Patricia. They started out attempting to be reasonable, though her version of reasonable was still incredibly condescending. She explained that she had talked to the HOA board, and they agreed that my prices were excessive, but they would be willing to pay $75 for the work. When I did not respond immediately, the texts grew more aggressive. She pointed out that according to the HOA bylaws, residents could be fined for failing to contribute to community improvement projects. She suggested that my business license could be in jeopardy if I continued to refuse service to my neighbors. She even implied that she could make life difficult for me in the subdivision if I did not cooperate. I screenshotted every message and saved them to a dedicated folder. In my experience, people like Patricia rarely stopped at verbal threats. Having documentation was always a good idea. By 7 that evening, I had finished 19 of my 23 jobs. My back ached, my hands were numb despite my insulated gloves, and I was running on coffee and adrenaline. I was clearing a commercial lot for a dental office when Patricia called again. Against my better judgment, I answered. "I have been trying to reach you all day," she said, skipping any pleasantries. "Sunset Ridge Lane is still not plowed. This is becoming a serious safety issue. We have elderly residents who need to get to medical appointments. We have people who have not been able to go to work. This is on you, Yannick." "No, Patricia, it is really not," I said, backing the truck up to get a better angle on a particularly stubborn pile of snow. "I have been working for 15 hours straight for paying customers. If you want to become a paying customer, I would be happy to add you to my schedule. But you need to understand that after a storm like this, I am booked out at least 2 days. And given the way you have been speaking to me, I would require payment up front." "Up front? That is absurd." "Not really. It is pretty standard for new clients, especially ones who have spent the entire day threatening me over text message." "I have not threatened you. I have simply pointed out your obligations as a member of this community." "Patricia, I do not have any obligation to provide free or discounted services to anyone, HOA or otherwise. If you want Sunset Ridge Lane plowed, here is what it is going to cost. The standard rate would be $1,500, like I said this morning. But given the hassle factor, the threats, and the fact that you hung up on me earlier, I am quoting you $4,500. That is triple my normal rate. And I need 50% up front via Venmo or Zelle before I even hook up the plow." I expected her to explode, to scream at me, threaten legal action, maybe even threaten to have me thrown out of the subdivision somehow. Instead, she went quiet. Not the angry silence from earlier, but something calculating. "That is price gouging," she finally said. "I could report you." "Go ahead." Price gouging laws typically apply to essential goods during declared emergencies, and they have specific definitions about what constitutes excessive pricing. Tripling my rate for a difficult customer who has harassed me all day is not going to meet that threshold, but feel free to check with a lawyer. Another long pause. "Fine. I will have the HOA pay your ridiculous fee. But I am going to make sure every resident knows how you treated us during this crisis." "That is your right," I said. "Do you want me to send you an invoice?" $22.50 up front, correct?" "That is correct. Half of $4,500. And Patricia, just to be crystal clear, that is to plow Sunset Ridge Lane one time. If it snows again tomorrow, that is a separate job at whatever rate I quote at that time. This is extortion. No, this is business. Do you want the invoice or not?" She agreed, though I could tell it physically pained her to do so. I sent her an official invoice through my business accounting software, clearly detailing the service to be provided, the total cost, and the upfront payment requirement. I also included my standard terms and conditions, which stated that payment was non-refundable once work commenced, and that any additional services would be billed separately. To my surprise, she actually paid. 20 minutes later, my phone chimed with a Venmo notification. $2,250 from Patricia Vandenberg with the note, for emergency snow removal that should have been done hours ago. I finished my last 4 jobs, grabbed a quick dinner from a drive-thru and headed home around 10:30. I was exhausted, but a deal was a deal. I drove through Meadowbrook Hills to assess Sunset Ridge Lane before committing to tackle it tonight or wait until morning. What I found made me stop my truck and just stare for a solid minute. Sunset Ridge Lane had already been plowed. Not professionally and not particularly well, but someone had clearly driven through with a plow attachment, pushing most of the snow to the sides. The surface was not clean. There were still patches of packed snow and ice, but it was passable, definitely drivable. I sat there, engine idling, and thought through my options. Patricia had paid me to plow a street that no longer needed plowing, at least not urgently. The ethical thing to do might be to refund her money and call it a misunderstanding. But then I thought about the harassment, the threats, the entitled attitude, and the assumption that I should work for free or next to nothing because I happen to live in the same subdivision. I called her. She answered immediately. "Are you here? Are you finally doing what you should have done this morning?" "I am here," I said. "And I have some questions. Did someone else already plow Sunset Ridge Lane?" A pause. "What? No, I mean someone drove through with a plow earlier, but they did a terrible job. There is still snow everywhere. That is why I need you to do it properly." "So someone did plow it, but you want me to clean it up further?" "It is not plowed, Yannick. There is snow on the road. I paid you to remove the snow, so remove it," I could have argued. I could have pointed out that she had misrepresented the situation, that a partially plowed road was not the same as an unpassable one, that the urgency she had claimed all day was clearly overstated. Instead, I decided to do exactly what I was paid to do, but on my terms. "I will handle it in the morning," I said. "I have been working for 19 hours and I am not safe to operate heavy equipment anymore. I will be there at 8. "That is unacceptable. I paid you to do this tonight." "Actually, you paid me to plow the road. The invoice does not specify a time." "I will be there at 8, and I will do a thorough job. That is the best I can offer." I hung up before she could argue further and drove home. My wife, Rachel, had waited up for me, which she usually did on long plow days. She had heated up leftovers and drawn me a hot bath, bless her. I gave her the condensed version of the Patricia situation while I ate. "So you are actually going to go plow a street that has already been plowed?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I am going to do what I was paid to do," I said. "She wants Sunset Ridge Lane plowed clean. I will plow it clean." If she had been reasonable this morning, I would have done it for $1,500. But she was not reasonable, so now she gets to pay triple. Rachel shook her head, but she was smiling. "You are going to end up in a feud with the HOA president." "I think that ship has sailed," I said. I set my alarm for 6:30, which felt cruel after such a long day, but I wanted to get the job done early. When I pulled onto Sunset Ridge Lane at 8 the next morning, there was already a small crowd gathered. Patricia stood in her driveway, arms crossed, wearing a puffy white jacket that probably cost more than my plow. 3 other residents stood with her, clearly having been summoned to witness whatever confrontation she had planned. I climbed out of my truck and approached with my phone out, already recording. I had learned years ago that documenting interactions with difficult clients could save you a lot of headaches. "Good morning," I said pleasantly. "I am here to complete the snow removal service as invoiced." "You are 8 hours late," Patricia said immediately. "This is completely unprofessional." "The invoice did not specify a time window," I replied calmly. "But I am here now and I will complete the work. Should take about an hour, maybe 90 minutes to do it right." One of the other residents, a man in his 60s wearing a Vikings jacket, spoke up. "The street has already been plowed. What exactly are we paying you for?" "I am not sure who we is," I said. "Patricia hired me as an individual, not as the HOA. And she specifically stated that the previous plowing was inadequate and she wanted a professional job done. That is what I am here to do." Patricia's face was turning red. "I hired you yesterday morning when the street was impassable. You refused to come. Now you show up when it is too late." "I did not refuse. I quoted you a price, which you initially rejected. You called me back later and agreed to my terms. You paid the deposit. I am here to do the work. Unless you are telling me you no longer want the service. In which case, the deposit is non-refundable, as stated in the terms and conditions you agreed to when you made the payment." The man in the Vikings jacket looked between us. "Wait, how much did you pay him?" Patricia hesitated, and I could see her calculating whether lying would serve her better. I saved her the trouble. The job was quoted at $4,500 with half due up front, so she has paid $2,250 and the remaining $2,250 is due upon completion. The shocked silence was delicious. One of the women actually gasped. $4,500 to plow one street," the man said. "Are you out of your mind?" "That is triple my normal rate," I admitted freely. "I charge a premium for clients who harass me, threaten my business, demand immediate service while I am already booked, and generally make the job more difficult than it needs to be." Patricia was offered the standard rate of $1,500 yesterday morning. She declined. She spent the day sending threatening text messages and making demands. When she finally agreed to hire me, the price had gone up accordingly. "That is not true," Patricia said quickly. "He is lying. He tried to extort me from the beginning." I pulled out my phone, grateful I had screenshotted everything. "I have all of our text conversations and voicemails saved. Would you like me to share them with your neighbors? Because I am happy to provide documentation." Patricia's mouth opened and closed a few times. The other residents were now looking at her with questions in their eyes, which was clearly not the outcome she had wanted from this little gathering. "I am going to complete the work now," I said, pocketing my phone. "I would appreciate it if everyone stayed on the sidewalks and out of the road for the next hour or so. Safety first." I climbed back into my truck and got to work. To Patricia's credit, she had been right about one thing. The previous plowing job had been mediocre at best. Whoever had done it had used an undersized plow and had not made enough passes to properly clear the width of the road. I spent the next 90 minutes doing it right, making multiple passes, clearing the snow all the way to the curb on both sides, breaking up the ice patches with the blade, and even doing a final pass with salt from the spreader attachment I had in the truck bed. By the time I finished, Sunset Ridge Lane looked better than most city-maintained streets. It was clean, clear, and safe. I had earned every penny of that $4,500, not because of the physical work, but because I had dealt with Patricia's nonsense for an entire day and still provided excellent service. I parked in front of her house and sent her the final invoice for the remaining balance. She came storming out before I could even put the truck in park. "I am not paying you another dime," she announced. "You took advantage of an emergency situation. You delayed service intentionally to drive up the cost, and you have embarrassed me in front of my neighbors. I will be filing a complaint with the Better Business Bureau, and I will be bringing this up at the next HOA meeting." I showed her my phone screen, which displayed the invoice. The work is complete, as agreed upon in our contract. You owe $2,250. Payment is due immediately upon completion, as stated in the terms and conditions. I do not care what your fake terms and conditions say. You are a scammer and I will not be scammed. I nodded slowly. Okay, let me make sure I understand. You are refusing to pay for services rendered after explicitly agreeing to the price and terms. That is exactly what I am saying. Got it. I pulled out my phone and opened my lawyer's contact information. I am going to head home and then my attorney will be in touch. In Minnesota, contractors have a legal right to place a lien on property when clients refuse to pay for completed work. Since you contracted this work on behalf of the HOA, and the work was done on HOA property, the lien would attach to the HOA's assets and potentially the common areas. That should make for an interesting conversation at your next board meeting. Her eyes went wide. You cannot do that. I absolutely can. It is a pretty straightforward process, actually. My attorney handles these disputes regularly. Of course, it would be easier if you just paid the invoice as agreed, but if you want to do this the hard way, I am prepared for that too. One of the other residents, a younger woman who had been watching from her front steps, called out, "Patricia, just pay him. You agreed to the price. I heard you on the phone yesterday telling my husband how you were going to pay him and then demand a refund later. Just pay the invoice." Patricia shot the woman a look that could have melted steel. "That is not what I said, Jennifer. It is exactly what you said. You said you would pay him to get the street plowed, and then you would find a reason to dispute the charge and get the money back. Just pay the man. The street looks great, and you are making all of us look bad." I made a mental note to send Jennifer a thank you card. Patricia was trapped now, caught in her own scheme with witnesses. She pulled out her phone, her fingers jabbing at the screen with unnecessary force, and a minute later my phone chimed with the payment notification. There, paid in full. I hope you are happy, taking advantage of people like this. What I am happy about, I said calmly, is running an honest business and getting paid fairly for my work. I hope you have a great rest of your day, Patricia. I drove away feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Sure, I had probably made an enemy out of the HOA president, but I had also stood my ground, not let myself be bullied into working for free, and collected $4,500 for a job that, under different circumstances, would have been $1,500. More importantly, I had documentation of everything, which meant Patricia could not twist the narrative later without being called out. The next HOA meeting was 3 weeks later. I had not planned to attend. I usually avoided them because they were tedious affairs full of arguments about fence heights and approved paint colors. But Rachel convinced me to go, pointing out that Patricia would definitely be talking about our interaction, and it would be better if I was there to defend myself. The meeting was held in the community center, a bland building with fluorescent lights and uncomfortable folding chairs. About 40 residents were scattered throughout the room when I arrived. Patricia sat at the front table with the other board members, and her expression when she saw me walk in was priceless. Pure, undiluted annoyance mixed with what might have been a flash of panic. The meeting started with the usual boring items: budget updates, landscaping contract renewals, reminders about trash can placement. I was starting to regret coming when Patricia cleared her throat and shuffled some papers. "The last item on our agenda tonight is a discussion about resident conduct and business practices within the community," she began. "It has come to my attention that some residents are using their position in the neighborhood to take advantage of their neighbors for financial gain." Here we go, I thought. During the recent snowstorm, we had a situation where a resident with snow removal equipment refused to help clear a community street unless he was paid an exorbitant fee. This resident demanded $4,500 to plow a single street, which is well above reasonable market rates. He used an emergency situation to price gouge his own neighbors. A few people turned to look at me. Word had clearly spread about what happened. I propose that we add a clause to our HOA bylaws requiring residents who own equipment that could be used for community maintenance to offer their services to the HOA at cost during emergencies. This would prevent future situations where people are held hostage by unreasonable pricing. An older man I recognized from a few doors down raised his hand. "Patricia, is it true that you were offered a lower price initially and you turned it down?" Patricia's jaw tightened. The initial price was still unreasonable, and regardless, the timing of the offer was not acceptable. The point is that we need policies in place to protect residents from this kind of exploitation. I raised my hand. Patricia very deliberately did not call on me, but another board member, a friendly guy named Tom who worked in insurance, pointed at me. "I think Yannick should be allowed to respond since you are talking about him by name." Patricia looked like she had bitten into a lemon, but she nodded. I stood up, keeping my voice level and professional. "Thank you. I want to clear up some misconceptions. First, Sunset Ridge Lane is not my street. I was not refusing to help my immediate neighbors. Second, I run a professional snow removal business. On the day of the storm, I had 23 paying clients booked, and I worked 19 hours straight to serve them. Patricia called me at 9 in the morning and demanded that I drop everything to plow her street for free. When I explained that I charge for my services, she offered $50 for a job that would take 2 to 3 hours and would normally cost $1,500. I pulled out my phone and held it up. I have all of our text and voicemail exchanges saved. Patricia spent the entire day harassing me, threatening my business, and demanding free labor. When she finally agreed to hire me, it was late evening, and I quoted her a premium rate because of the harassment and the difficulty of working with her as a client. She agreed to the price, paid the deposit, and I completed the work exactly as contracted. The street was plowed to a higher standard than city-maintained roads, and several of her neighbors complimented the quality of the work. Jennifer, the woman who had called Patricia out before, spoke up. "I was there when he finished. The street looked amazing." And Patricia told several of us she planned to pay him and then dispute the charge to get her money back. The room erupted in murmurs. Patricia was now visibly angry, her face flushed. "That is not true. You are misrepresenting what I said." "I am happy to share the recordings and text messages with the board," I said. "Complete transparency. What you will see is a business owner being harassed by someone who thought that living in the same neighborhood entitled her to free labor. I do not think we want HOA bylaws that require residents to provide professional services at cost. That is not fair to anyone who runs a business." Tom, the insurance guy, nodded. "I have to agree with Yannick. I work in insurance. If the HOA required me to provide insurance advice at cost to every resident who asked, I would never have time for my actual clients. We cannot force people to work for free or at cost just because they live here." Another board member, a woman named Susan, chimed in. "And frankly, Patricia, if you had handled this professionally from the beginning, you could have gotten the street plowed for a third of what you ended up paying. This seems like a problem of your own making." The discussion continued for another 20 minutes, with Patricia becoming increasingly defensive and isolated. Several residents spoke up about their own negative interactions with her, how she had been heavy-handed in enforcing HOA rules, how she had threatened fines over minor infractions, and how she generally made living in the neighborhood more stressful than it needed to be. By the end of the meeting, not only had Patricia's proposed bylaw change been rejected, but there were rumblings about calling for a vote of no confidence in her leadership. I left feeling vindicated but also a little sorry for her. She had brought this on herself, but watching someone get publicly torn down was never pleasant, even when they deserved it. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days after the HOA meeting, I received a formal letter from the HOA board stating that my business was in violation of community regulations. According to Patricia, I was running a commercial operation out of my residence, which was prohibited by the bylaws. The letter cited multiple instances of my commercial vehicle being parked on the street overnight, business equipment being stored on my property in view of neighbors, and commercial signage on my truck. I read the letter 3 times, feeling my blood pressure rise with each pass. The claims were technically accurate but wildly misleading. Yes, I parked my work truck on the street sometimes, but so did half the neighborhood. Yes, I had equipment in my garage, but it was not visible from the street because the garage door was always closed. And yes, my truck had a small magnetic sign with my business name and number, but it was removable and only about 12 inches wide. I called Tom, the board member who had supported me at the meeting, and asked him about the letter. He sighed heavily. Yeah, Patricia pushed that through. She convinced 2 other board members that you were in violation. I voted against it, and so did Susan, but we were outvoted. Look, between you and me, this is retaliation. She is embarrassed about how the snow plowing thing went down, and she is trying to hit back. Can she actually enforce this? I asked. Technically, yes. The bylaws do have restrictions on home-based businesses, but they are usually enforced in cases where someone is causing a genuine nuisance, like running a daycare with cars parked everywhere all day or operating a repair shop with customers coming and going constantly. You are not doing any of that, but Patricia can push for fines, and if you do not comply, the HOA can take you to court. What are my options? You can request a hearing, present your case, and hope the full board overrules her. Or you can just comply with her demands and make sure your truck is never on the street and never has signage when it is on HOA property. Or you can lawyer up and fight it, but that is expensive and time-consuming. I thanked Tom and spent the rest of the day fuming. Rachel was more pragmatic. Just park the truck at a storage facility, she said. It is not worth the fight. You will spend thousands on legal fees to defend your right to park on the street. Just rent a space for $100 a month and be done with it. She was right, of course, but it galled me to give Patricia even that small victory. Still, I was not interested in a prolonged legal battle over parking. I found a storage facility about 2 miles away, rented a space, and started parking the truck there overnight. It was inconvenient, but it removed Patricia's ammunition. I thought that would satisfy her. It did not. Over the next month, I received 3 more violation notices. One for my lawn being a 1/4 inch too long according to HOA standards, which was absurd because I literally made my living maintaining lawns. One for having my trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup, which happened because I was out on a job and did not get home in time. And one for an unauthorized modification to my property, which turned out to be a small solar panel I had installed on my garage roof to power some outdoor lighting. Each violation came with a fine. $50 for the lawn, $75 for the trash cans, $200 for the solar panel. I paid them all because fighting would cost more than the fines, but I documented everything. I also started keeping detailed logs of other residents who were in violation of the same rules but were not being fined. It became clear very quickly that Patricia was selectively enforcing the bylaws against me while ignoring identical violations by other residents. After the fourth fine in 6 weeks, I had had enough. I called a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes, a woman named Margaret Reed, who had a reputation for taking on overreaching boards. I laid out the entire situation, from the snow plowing incident through the ongoing harassment via selective bylaw enforcement. Margaret listened carefully, asked a few clarifying questions, and then leaned back in her chair with a slight smile. This is one of the more clear-cut cases of retaliation and selective enforcement I have seen in a while. You have documentation of everything. Everything. Text messages, voicemails, photos of other residents in violation, copies of all the notices and fines, even recordings from the HOA meeting. Good. Here is what we are going to do. First, I am going to send a cease and desist letter to Patricia and the HOA board, putting them on notice that the selective enforcement constitutes harassment and that continued action will result in a lawsuit. Second, I am going to demand that all fines issued in the past 60 days be refunded, since you can demonstrate that the bylaws are not being uniformly enforced. Third, I am going to request a formal hearing before the full board where we will present your evidence and make the case for removing Patricia from her position. Can we actually get her removed? Possibly. At minimum, we can make her position on the board uncomfortable enough that she might resign. Most HOA presidents do not want the liability exposure that comes with documented harassment and selective enforcement. If she has any sense, she will back down. Margaret sent the cease and desist letter the next day. The response was swift and predictable. Patricia called me directly, her voice shaking with rage. You are suing the HOA over a few parking violations. This is insane. I am not suing anyone yet, I said calmly. My attorney sent a letter pointing out that you are selectively enforcing bylaws against me while ignoring the same violations by other residents. That is harassment, Patricia, and it is illegal. I am doing my job as HOA president. If you were not constantly breaking the rules, we would not have a problem. I have photos of 7 other residents with commercial vehicles parked on the street overnight. I have photos of trash cans left out for days. I have photos of unauthorized property modifications. None of those residents have received fines, just me, because you are angry that I did not plow your street for free. That is not what this is about. Then prove it. Stop issuing me fines for things you ignore when other people do them. Treat all residents equally like you are supposed to. She hung up on me again. It seemed to be her signature move. The formal hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Margaret advised me to stay calm, stick to the facts, and let the evidence speak for itself. She also suggested I reach out to some of the neighbors who had supported me at the previous meeting to see if they would be willing to speak on my behalf. Jennifer, the woman who had called Patricia out before, agreed immediately. So did Tom from the board, and an older couple who lived on my street who had been fined by Patricia in the past for similarly minor infractions. We had a solid case, and I felt confident going into the hearing. The night before the hearing, I got a call from Tom. His voice was tight with stress. You need to be really careful tomorrow, he said. Patricia has been cornered, and I do not trust what she might do. She has been asking me and the other board members about procedural rules, specifically about emergency votes and removal of residents who pose a danger to community welfare. What does that even mean? I do not know, but it worries me. Just have your attorney ready for anything. The hearing was held in the same community center as the regular meetings, but the atmosphere was completely different. There was tension in the air and the room was packed. Word had spread that there was drama, and apparently half the neighborhood had decided this was better entertainment than whatever was on Netflix. Patricia sat at the board table with the other members, but she was flanked by two people I did not recognize. When Margaret and I took our seats, she leaned over and whispered, "Those are attorneys. The HOA hired outside counsel. This is bigger than I thought." The hearing started with Patricia making a formal statement about my violations of community bylaws. She presented a packet of photos, dates, and detailed descriptions of each infraction. It was thorough, I had to give her that. She made it sound like I was running a junkyard out of my house and destroying property values for everyone. Then Margaret stood up and systematically destroyed her argument. She presented our evidence of selective enforcement, showing photos of other residents committing identical violations with no fines issued. She presented the timeline of violations, demonstrating that they began immediately after the snow plowing incident and the contentious HOA meeting. She played portions of the recorded voicemails and text messages showing Patricia's harassment and threats. And she called our witnesses, who testified about their own negative experiences with Patricia's leadership. By the time Margaret finished, the mood in the room had shifted dramatically. Even the HOA's attorneys looked uncomfortable. One of them stood and asked for a 15-minute recess to consult with their clients. When everyone reconvened, the lead attorney for the HOA made a brief statement. After reviewing the evidence presented, the board agrees that there may have been some inconsistencies in bylaw enforcement. We propose a settlement where all fines issued to Mr. Harding in the past 90 days are refunded, and the HOA agrees to implement a standardized enforcement protocol to ensure fair treatment of all residents moving forward. It was a complete capitulation, and Margaret knew it. She glanced at me, I nodded, and she accepted the settlement on my behalf. The hearing ended shortly after, and as people filed out, several neighbors came up to shake my hand and thank me for standing up to Patricia. Patricia herself left quickly, her face pale and her attorneys close behind. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. I had won, but it had taken months of stress, documentation, and ultimately legal fees to get here. The real surprise came 2 days later when Tom called me with news. Patricia resigned from the board this morning. She sent an email to all the board members saying she was stepping down effective immediately due to personal reasons. She also put her house on the market. She is moving, apparently. I guess the embarrassment was too much. Or maybe her attorneys advised her that staying would open her up to more liability. Either way, she is gone. I felt an unexpected pang of something like regret. I had not set out to drive Patricia out of the neighborhood. I had just wanted to be treated fairly and be paid appropriately for my work. But the situation had escalated far beyond what either of us probably intended. Rachel put it in perspective when I told her that evening. She made her own choices, Yannick. You did not force her to harass you or to selectively enforce bylaws or to make this personal. She did that herself, and when she got called out for it, she could not handle the consequences. That is on her, not on you. The HOA elected a new president a month later, a retired engineer named Paul who seemed far more interested in maintaining common areas than in power trips. One of his first acts was to formally apologize to me on behalf of the board for the previous administration's conduct, and to thank me for holding them accountable. Life in Meadowbrook Hills returned to normal. I continued running my business, parking my truck at the storage facility to avoid any future conflicts, and generally keeping my head down. The next winter, when the first big snowstorm hit, I got a call from Paul. "Hey, Yannick. I know this might be a sensitive topic, but the board was wondering if you would be willing to contract with the HOA to maintain some of our private roads during major snow events. We would pay your standard rates, of course, and we would set everything up in advance with a proper contract. No pressure if you would rather not deal with us after what happened last year." I thought about it for a moment, then quoted him my standard rate for the work. He agreed immediately, and we signed a contract that clearly laid out expectations, pricing, and timing. That winter, I plowed Sunset Ridge Lane 3 times, along with 2 other private roads in the development, and the HOA paid every invoice promptly and without complaint. I ran into Patricia one last time before she moved. I was loading mulch at a garden center and she was there buying plants, presumably to stage her house for sale. We made eye contact, and for a moment I thought she might just turn and walk away. Instead, she approached. "I owe you an apology," she said stiffly. "I handled the situation with your business poorly. I let my frustration get the better of me, and I made things personal when they should not have been. I am sorry for that." It was clearly difficult for her to say, and I appreciated the effort. "I accept your apology. For what it is worth, I am sorry things escalated the way they did. I never wanted to cause you that much trouble." She nodded, looking tired. "I have been on HOA boards for 15 years. Different neighborhoods, different states. I thought I knew how to lead a community. But I think I forgot somewhere along the way that it is supposed to be about helping people, not controlling them. Anyway, I just wanted to say that before I left." We shook hands, and that was the last time I saw her. Her house sold quickly, and a young family moved in with 3 kids who loved playing in the snow. The dad introduced himself and mentioned he had heard I did snow removal. I gave him a fair quote for his driveway, and he became a regular client. The whole experience taught me several valuable lessons about standing your ground, the importance of documentation, and the danger of letting small disputes escalate into major conflicts. It also reinforced something I already knew. Most people are reasonable if you treat them fairly, but there will always be a few who think their position or their circumstances entitle them to special treatment. When you encounter those people, the best thing you can do is stay professional, stick to your principles, and let the facts speak for themselves. My business continued to grow, and within 2 years, I had hired 2 additional employees and expanded into full-service property maintenance beyond just landscaping and snow removal. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA remained a client, and under Paul's leadership, the relationship was professional and mutually beneficial. I even volunteered to serve on the landscaping committee, figuring that being involved was better than complaining from the sidelines. Every winter, when the snow starts falling and my phone begins ringing with emergency requests, I think back to that first call from Patricia. I think about her demand that I work for free, her assumption that living in the same neighborhood meant I owed her my time and labor, and her shocked anger when I refused. And then I think about the $4,500 she eventually paid for a job that should have cost $1,500, and I cannot help but smile. There is a saying in business, the customer is always right. But there is an important corollary that some people forget. That does not mean every customer is worth having. Some clients will cost you more in stress, time, and aggravation than any amount of money they might pay. Learning to recognize those clients and either charge them appropriately or walk away entirely is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. Patricia taught me that lesson more thoroughly than any business school could have. She also taught me that sometimes, when someone demands you work for free and treats you with disrespect, The most satisfying response is to triple your rate and make them pay up front. It is not about revenge or pettiness. It is about valuing your own time, your own expertise, and your own dignity enough to walk away from situations that do not serve you. The neighborhood has been peaceful ever since. The HOA runs smoothly, residents treat each other with respect, and when the snow falls, I am out there plowing the streets we agreed upon, at the rates we agreed upon, without drama or conflict. It is a good reminder that most problems in life are not really that complicated. Treat people fairly, pay them what they are worth, and communicate clearly. Do those three things, and you can avoid 90% of the conflicts that people get themselves tangled up in. As for Patricia, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she moved to Arizona, where HOA politics are apparently even more intense than they were in Minnesota. I hope she found whatever she was looking for, and I hope she learned the same lessons I did from our conflict. But either way, her life is her own now, and mine is mine, and we both moved on. The real winners in all of this were the residents of Meadowbrook Hills, who got better HOA leadership, fairer enforcement of community bylaws, and clean streets during the winter. And me, of course. I got $4,500 for a job that should have paid $1,500. A clear demonstration that standing your ground can pay off literally and figuratively. And a story I still tell at business networking events when people ask about dealing with difficult clients. So if you are ever in a situation where someone demands you provide professional services for free or at insulting rates, remember my story. Remember that you have the right to set your own prices, to charge more for difficult clients, and to require payment up front if someone has proven themselves untrustworthy. And remember that documentation is your best friend. Record conversations where legal, save text messages and emails, take photos, and keep detailed notes. When the inevitable conflict arises, you will be glad you have evidence to back up your version of events. Running your own business means dealing with all kinds of people, from the wonderful clients who pay on time and treat you with respect to the nightmares who think the world revolves around them. The key is figuring out quickly which category someone falls into and adjusting your approach accordingly. Charge what you are worth, protect yourself legally, and never be afraid to walk away from a bad situation. That winter taught me all of that and more. It reinforced my belief that standing up for yourself is not just about pride or ego. It is about setting boundaries, establishing your value, and refusing to be taken advantage of by people who see your kindness or your proximity as an excuse to exploit you. I am grateful for the lesson, even if it came wrapped in months of stress and conflict. These days, business is good. My client list is full of people who appreciate quality work and pay fair prices. The HOA relationship is professional and drama-free. And every time it snows, I attach that plow to my truck, pour a thermos of coffee, and head out to do work I am proud of for people who value it. And if anyone ever demands I work for free again, I will remember Patricia Vandenberg, and I will smile as I quote them triple rate and demand payment up front. Because my time is valuable, my expertise is valuable, and I will never again let anyone convince me otherwise.